Welcome to Cheat Sheet Tales, where secrets slip, lies unravel, and the truth always has a twist. Real stories, raw confessions, and shocking betrayals. Drop a comment if you've ever caught a red flag too late. Now let's get into today's tale. The words on my computer screen blurred together, but the meaning burned themselves into my mind with brutal clarity. Clear your desk by the end of the day. Human Resources will handle the exit paperwork after 5 years of unwavering loyalty to Summit Edge Logistics. This was how it ended, a cold mail arriving just before sunrise 3 days. That was all I had taken. 3 miserable days of approved bereavement leave to bury the man who'd taught me everything about strength, patience, and resilience, apparently my father's. Death had been an inconvenience to Von Drake's quarterly report deadlines. I sat back in my chair, the leather squeaking beneath me, and stared out at the boy skyline, stunned but not surprised. My name is Sloan Mercer, and until approximately 3 minutes ago, I was the regional team lead of Summit Edge highest performing division at 34. I had built not just a career, but a community, a team that celebrated birthdays, mourned losses, and smashed revenue targets side by side. I had sacrificed weekends, holidays, and countless late nights in the belief that loyalty would be recognized someday. Now all that remained was a cardboard box and an email signed off with corporate detachment. I methodically packed my desk, every movement mechanical, my mind still trying to comprehend the sheer audacity of Van's betrayal. I wrapped the tiny cactus my team gave me last Christmas in bubble wrap, folded the photo from our last retreat, and slid handwritten thank you notes into the box, like they were precious relics. 5 years, condensed into a few pounds of personal items, and a story. I would never forget when Tanya from accounting walked in. Coffee in hand, her face pale the moment she saw me. "Sloan, what's happening?" she asked, setting her cup down with a sharp clatter. I smiled tightly, lifting my cardboard box off the desk. Apparently attending my father's funeral showed insufficient commitment to Summit Edge, I said. Tanya's mouth fell open, outrage flashing in her eyes as the cruelty of it all registered. One by one, the rest of my team arrived, and the news spread like wildfire across the floor, faces shifting from confusion to anger as they took in the sight of me packing my life away. Hunter Creed was the first to storm over, his easy smile gone, his fists clenched at his sides. "This is complete bull," he hissed under his breath. "We just closed the Newbrook merger. Because of you, Sloan." I shook my head slowly, taping the box shut with a practiced calm. "I didn't feel it doesn't matter," I said softly. Von made his choice. Hunter looked like he wanted to punch a wall, and judging by the murmurs rising behind him, he wasn't the only one. By 9:30 a.m., 7 of my team, Hunter, Seelin Ward, Maddox Kane, Raya Stanton, Cassia Vale, Elra Quinn, and Briar Talk stood silently around my desk, a visible wall of solidarity. Some were barely holding it together, others already plotting in their minds, and behind them, like a dark cloud looming, stood Von Drake himself. His arms were crossed, his expression tight with forced authority, but his eyes flickered uneasily. "We have deadlines to meet," he barked, his voice brittle and desperate. No one moved. The tension was thick enough to cut heavy with the weight of unspoken loyalties and burning resentment. Van's lips thinned as he barked louder now. Still no one moved until I nodded slightly, a silent permission for them to go back to their desks, to be their time. Van stalked toward me as the others reluctantly dispersed, lowering his voice to a menacing hiss. "This could have been handled with more discretion if you'd waited until the end of the day to pack up," he sneered. I meet this. Eyes steadily, my voice icy as I replied, "Like the discretion you showed when you fired me by email during my father's funeral." His mouth opened, but for once no excuses came out. Instead, he fumbled with his tie, clearing his throat and muttering, "Business needs shift rapidly. Sloan, Summit Edge needs people who understand that." My hand itched to slap the smugness off his face, but I simply lifted my box and said, "Save your breath, Vaughn. You're going to regret today more than I ever will." Rowan Steele from HR waited for Near the elevators. Her posture. Rigid brother eyes filled with quiet discomfort. He handed me the termination papers without making eye contact, her voice soft. "I'm sorry, Sloan," she said. "For everything." I barely heard her over the roar in my ears as I scanned the documents: 2-week severance, a strict non-disparagement clause, an ridiculous 6-month non-compete covering every logistics company within their $100 MEM. Is there an actual reason for this firing? Rowan asked cautiously, her professionalism faltering. I simply pulled out my phone, showed her the cold, brutal email Vaughn had sent, and watched, her eyes widen in shock. "You have no previous warnings, no probation, no documented complaints," she said, incredulously. I nodded, slipping the phone back into my pocket. "Correct," I said. "Just 3 days off to bury my father." Rowan's face tightened as she excused herself to consult, with legal leaving me, staring out the tall windows. Overlooking the Boys River, the water moved fast this time of year, swollen from the mountain runoff. But the rocks beneath it stayed steady, just like my father had taught me. I could almost hear his voice. In my mind, "Be like the rock, Sloan girl, let the current do the work." 20 minutes later, Rowan returned, her expression neutral, but her shoulders slightly slumped in defeat. "Idaho is an adult employment state," she said softly. "Summit Edge is within its legal rights." I nodded again, signing the papers without hesitation. "Summit Edge can do whatever it wants," I said, rising to my feet and squaring my shoulders. "And so can I." I walked out without another word, past cubicles of stunned co-workers and old friends who couldn't quite meet my eyes outside the September air. Air was bright and cold, and it smelled like endings and beginnings. I placed my box carefully into the trunk of my car, closed the lid with finality, and sat behind the wheel, letting the silence wrap around me. My phone vibrated violently in the cup. Holder text after text pouring in from Hunter, Celine Maddox, and the rest. "This is wrong. You didn't deserve this. We have your back." A sharp, unexpected smile curled the corners of my mouth as I turned the ignition. I wouldn't fight Summit Edge in the courts. I wouldn't lower myself to public spectacle. No. My revenge would be quieter, colder, and infinitely more devastating. I would build something better, and Von Drake would have a front row seat to watch every glorious second of it. The first person I called after leaving Summit Edge was Griffin Maddox, CEO of Vertex Transport Systems, Summit's biggest competitor. We had met at an industry conference in Seattle a year earlier, and he'd made no secret about wanting me on his team ever since. When Griffin answered, his voice was brisk but warm, the tone of a man who always smelled opportunity before others even knew it existed. "Sloan Mercer," he said. "I've been waiting for this call. We agreed to meet that afternoon at Apervit Executive Lounge downtown, a place where deals were made over quiet conversations and expensive coffee." Arrived early, my cardboard box still sitting in my trunk like a ghost of my old life. I hadn't yet buried Griffin. Entered exactly on time, his silver hair gleaming under the chandelier light, his presence commanding without being overbearing. He shook my hand firmly and said, "Tell me everything." I laid it out in brutal detail, showing him the termination email, the HR paperwork, the absurd non-compete clause. Griffin listened without interrupting, his sharp eyes narrowing with each revelation. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, steepling his eye. Fingers in thought, firing their top regional lead for attending a funeral, he said almost with disbelief, "Von Drake just handed me the best recruitment tool I've ever had." He smiled, then slow and razored. "Sloan, I want you at Vertex as Director of Pacific Northwest Operations. Bigger role, bigger team, bigger budget." My heart raced at the offer, but practicality kicked in fast. My non-compete. I reminded him, Summit's legal. Team will come after me the second they smell blood. Griffin's grin widened, wolfish and assured, "Let them try. It's poorly drafted and completely unenforceable under Idaho law, especially considering the circumstances of your termination." He slid a thick folder across the table. "Our lawyers are already prepared to defend. All you have to do is say, yes." It flipped through the pages. The numbers on The offer letter making my breath hitcha. 40% salary, increase full relocation, support if needed, performance bonuses and a personal signing, bonus large enough to buy a brand new car. For a brief dangerous moment, anger at Summit Edge coiled like a snake in my chest, but I shoved it down. This wasn't about anger. It was about evolution. I'll take the weekend to review, I said carefully. Not because I needed time, but because leverage was leverage. Griffin nodded, approvingly understanding the game. Without offense. Good play it smart. Meanwhile, if any of your former team reaches out to you, Vertex is growing fast. We'll have plenty of room for them. That night, I sat at my kitchen counter. Griffin's folder opened beside me, cooling dinner. My phone buzzed. Non-stop. Messages from Hunter Celine Maddox, Ria Cassia LRA, and Breyer stacking up one after another. They were angry. They were restless. They were waiting for a signal around midnight. A private text came in from Hunter. If you move, we move with you. Just say the word. He stared at the screen for a long time, feeling something deep inside my chest shift like tectonic plates grinding into a new landscape. I typed a single word. In reply. Soon the next morning, a new storm was brewing at Summit Edge. Tanya texted first, breathless with gossip emergency. Saturday meeting. Van looks like he hasn't slept. Wilson. Account in jeopardy. Nobody can find your files. I smiled grimly into my coffee, unsurprised. My organization system had always been meticulous, but not idiot-proof. I had trained my team, but Vaughn had been too arrogant, too dismissive to ever bother learning the systems himself. Without me, the whole operation was a beautiful ticking time bomb, and the fuse was lit by noon. 3 different team members had confirmed that key accounts were threatening to pull out. Meanwhile, Helena Cross, the regional manager, was apparently asking pointed questions about why Summit Edge's top performer had been terminated without executive review. Dan's version of events that I had abandoned. My post during critical operations wasn't holding up under scrutiny, especially not when clients started complaining about service gaps and project delays. The cracks in the walls of Summit Edge's ivory tower were spiderwebbing faster than even I had dared to hope. I met with Vincent Cole, a high-powered employment attorney, recommended by Griffin on Saturday. Afternoon, Vincent reviewed my termination paperwork, the non-compete, and the email chain, tapping his pen thoughtfully against the edge of his desk. They don't have a leg to stand in, he said finally. If they try to enforce the non-compete, they'll lose badly, and they know it. Should I wait for them to make a move? I asked. Vincent shook his head. No need. Just start your new job. If they threaten you, we counter-threaten. With wrongful termination action, Summit Edge will fold faster than you can blink. They won't risk the PR nightmare. Sunday was eerily quiet, as if the universe was holding its breath. Before the plunge, I finalized the paperwork for Vertex, sent back my signed contract to Griffin, and texted my team. Big news coming tomorrow. Be ready one by one. They responded with nothing but a single word. Each ready. Monday dawned, bright and cold, the kind of morning that felt meant for battles and rebirths. I dressed sharply in a navy suit that made them feel like steel wrapped in silk, and headed downtown. To Vertex's sleek glass tower. Griffin was waiting in the lobby, shaking my hand with a wide grin. Welcome aboard, Sloan, he said, his voice rayed with satisfaction. Let's make history. We spent the morning crafting an internal memo to introduce me to Vertex staff and drafting transition strategies to onboard the potential flood of new clients and talent I was about to bring. Griffin wasn't just building a new division, he was preparing for a full-scale siege, and I was his secret weapon. By lunch, my former Summit Edge teammates had started reaching out. In-force Hunter first, then C. Maddox, Ria Cassia, LRA, and Breyer, all asking if there was a place for them at Vertex. Is scheduled confidential meetings for each of them over the next 2 days. Griffin made one thing clear: if they're half as good as you say, we want every single one. Meanwhile, back at Summit Edge, the collapse had begun. Clients were furious. Deadlines were missed. Von Drake had called 2 emergency meetings in 48 hours trying to triage the hemorrhaging. Helena Cross, summoned back early from a regional summit, was reportedly demanding a full audit of recent HR termination, including mine. I didn't need to lift a finger. Van's empire was crumbling under the weight of his own incompetence. All I had to do was stay steady, just like Therox. Tuesday morning came with a simmering tension that was impossible to ignore. I sat in my new Vertex office, a glass-walled corner suite overlooking the boys' river, sipping coffee and reviewing resumes one by one. My old team from Summit, Edge, Hunter Creed, Celine Ward, Maddox, Kane, Rhea Stanton, Cassia Vale, Lyra Quinn, and Briar Knox filed into private meetings with Vertex's executive recruiters. Each one left those interviews with quiet determination, burning in their eyes. Griffin Maddox called me into his office by noon, a thick stack of documents already waiting on his desk. "We won all of them," he said, without preamble, tapping the folders with a heavy hand. "Your instincts about their loyalty and talent were dead on." I smiled, feeling a dangerous thrill roll through me. This was how you dismantled a kingdom without ever drawing a sword. Meanwhile, Helen Cross at Summit Edge was in full crisis mode, but word reached me through Tanya that Von Drake had been summoned to an emergency board meeting. The previous evening, after clients had threatened mass contract withdrawals, the Wilson account had already given formal notice of intent to terminate. If immediate changes weren't made, the collapse had begun, and I wasn't even close to finish. By Wednesday, it became official. Vertex announced the onboarding of 7 new senior logistics specialists, all formerly Summit Edge's top-performing team members. The industry press caught wind of the mass exodus within hours. Headlines screaming about Summit Edge hammering talent and facing client defections. Griffin made sure the announcement was polished, professional, and just cutting enough to wound without looking vindictive. The message was clear: Vertex was ascending, and Summit Edge was bleeding. That afternoon, I received a call I had almost been expecting. Rowan Steele's name flashed across my screen, and for a moment I considered letting it ring. Instead, curiosity won out, and he answered smoothly. "Rowan," I said lightly. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Her voice was strained, professional, but undercut by obvious panic. "Sloan, Helena Cross would like to arrange a meeting with you at your convenience." I leaned back in my chair, savoring the reversal of power. "That's very interesting," I said, letting the silence stretch until Rowan fidgeted audibly. "We realized there were mistakes made regarding your departure." Rowan added cautiously, "M. Cross would like to discuss potential resolutions." Almost laughed, but instead I said, "I'll think about it," before hanging up without another word. Griffin was waiting for my update when I entered his office, and when I relayed the conversation, his expression darkened with amusement. "They're scrambling," he said, standing to pour himself a whiskey. Even though it wasn't yet 5, when they know they're bleeding out and they're desperate to sew up the wound before the board demands someone's head. I didn't say it aloud, but we both knew whose head they would offer. First, Vondra's smug reign was over, and the best part was that I hadn't even needed to lift a finger. To destroy him, all I had done was walk away, and the empire he built on fear and intimidation had crumbled under its own rot. The satisfaction of it was sharper, cleaner than any revenge fantasy I had ever allowed myself to imagine. It wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about justice. Late Wednesday evening, as Thiessen set in a brilliant wash of gold over the boys' skyline, I received a group message from my team. First client secured at Vertex Wilson, account officially. Ours, I grinned, letting the news wash over me like a baptism. The very clients Vaughn had claimed to value, above all else, had chosen us instead. On Thursday, the pressure inside Summit Edge exploded publicly. Helena Cross issued a carefully worded internal memo announcing significant restructuring efforts due to strategic transitions. Within the hour, it leaked to the trade press. Speculation ran wild. Summits scanned projects, paused recruiters, circling like vultures over what remained. Friday morning, my phone buzzed with another unknown number. This time it was Helena herself. I answered coolly, my voice composed, despite the rush of adrenaline in my veins. "Ms. Cross," I said, deliberately omitting the courtesy of her first name. "What can I do for you?" Her voice was tight, polished to a corporate sheen. "Sloan, we would like to formally extend an offer to reinstate your position with a significant increase in compensation and full authority over your division. I let that hang in the air, savoring it like fine wine. I'm afraid. You're too late, I said softly, my voice a velvet dagger. There was a sharp inhale in the other end of the line. We're willing to match whatever Vertex offered. You, Helena pressed, plus a 20% premium. I almost pied her, then almost, but pity was not something Summit Edge had ever shown me. It's not about the money, I said, final and cutting. It's about respect. And once that's gone, there's no buying it. Back Helena faltered, and when she spoke again, there was real defeat threaded into her words. Sloan, Summit Edge, is at risk of losing several major accounts because of the situation. We are prepared to offer a public apology in writing if necessary. I smiled to myself, imagining Van's reaction if he heard that I'm honored by the offer. I said, smoothly, but my loyalty now lies with Vertex. Have a good day, Ems Cross. I ended the call without waiting for her response, sealing the last nail in the coffin Von Drake had built with his own arrogance that afternoon. Hunter Cellini and the rest of the team gathered at a downtown pub to celebrate the Wilson account transfer. As I looked around, edible at their faces, smiling, laughing, free, I realized something powerful. We weren't just surviving after Summit Edge, we were thriving. Drinks clinked, ked together in noisy toasts. And somewhere, between laughter and victory, Hunter leaned closer to me. You know, he said, his voice low and earnest, you didn't just leave Summit Edge. You took its heart with you. His words stayed with me. Long after the night ended back at my apartment, as I sat on the balcony, watching the lights of the city flicker like stars, I thought about everything that had happened. They had tried to discard me like I was disposable. Instead, I had dismantled them piece by piece, without ever needing to raise my voice. The river moved steadily in the distance, silver and endless, just as it always had, and like the rocks, I had stayed steady, patient, immovable. In the end, it wasn't anger or revenge that toppled Summit Edge's false empire. It was simply the truth. Monday morning, at Vertex, felt like stepping onto the bridge of a flagship vessel set to conquer my new division. Once just an idea sketched out over late-night strategy sessions with Griffin had become the company's crown jewel. The Wilson account was only the beginning, too. More major clients had quietly reached out over the weekend. Word traveled fast in logistics, and everyone knew Summit Edge's fortress had crumbled from within. As I entered the conference room for our executive briefing, the atmosphere crackled with energy. Hunter, Selena Maddox, Ria Kasha LRA, and Breyer sat at the table, already their faces bright with ambition and determination. Griffin opened the meeting with a grin that could have powered the building. Welcome to the new standard. Me, he declared, looking straight at me. Over the next hour, we reviewed numbers that made even seasoned executives sit up straighter. Our division had secured 4 major contracts in under 6 weeks, totaling over $40 million in projected annual revenue. Operational efficiency was up 22%, compared to industry averages, and employee retention among senior specialists sat at an unprecedented 97%. Vertex had become the envy of the entire sector, and I knew deep down that it was just the beginning. By mid-May morning, another piece of satisfying news arrived. Summit Edge Logistics issued a press release announcing organizational restructuring and leadership realignment efforts following recent client transitions. In reality, Von Drake had been unceremoniously fired over the weekend. Escorted out of the building without ceremony, Helen Cross remained, but her authority had been drastically curtailed under board oversight. It was hard not to smile as I forwarded the news to Hunter, who replied instantly, with a string of laughing emojis. I had never needed to lift a finger to destroy Von. His downfall had been inevitable, the natural result of arrogance built atop a crumbling foundation. I simply made sure the right people were standing, clear when it fell that afternoon as I was reviewing proposals for a new regional expansion. Rowan Steele's name popped up again on my phone. Curiosity got the better of me, and I answered Sloan. She began cautiously. Off there, Curd. I wanted to let you know. Something. I leaned back, already suspecting what she Was about to say, "Helen Cross is leaving Summit Edge," Rowan said. She accepted a role at a consulting firm that specializes in corporate culture repair. I almost laughed at the irony. Summit Edge had destroyed its own culture so thoroughly that even its surviving leaders had no choice but to abandon ship. I appreciate the update. I said politely, though. Inside I felt nothing but a cold finality. The empire that had betrayed me no longer existed. Not really. What remained was a hollow shell staggering toward acquisition or bankruptcy. It wasn't my concern anymore by Thursday. The rumors were confirmed. Meridian Global Transport had entered talks to purchase Summit Edge's remaining assets. The once proud company would be absorbed, its name erased from the industry it had. Once dominated at Vertex, we celebrated another major account victory. One of Summit Edge's former flagship clients had officially transferred their business to us. Every toast we made that evening felt like the final nail in a long overdue coffin. 3 months after my firing, Griffin hosted a formal gala to celebrate the success of our division, held at the top floor of Boise's tallest building. The event gleamed with crystal candlelight and a palpable sense of triumph. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling, windows drinking hand, looking out over the city that had once felt so small to me tonight. It stretched wide and full of promise. Griffin found me a few minutes later, raising his glass with a knowing smile. "You know, Sloan," he said, "sometimes the best revenge isn't vengeance at all. It's building something so extraordinary that those who doubted you can't help but notice." I clinked my glass against his, feeling the truth of his words settled deep in my bones. As the evening wore on, I danced, laughed, and toasted with my team, the family I had chosen, not the one I had been forced into. Celine pulled me aside at one point, her eyes bright. "None of us would be here without you," she said. "You showed us what real leadership looks like." Her words hit harder than she probably knew. Later that night, alone on my balcony, overlooking the quiet city, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. Summit Edge had tried to make me feel small, disposable, easily replaced. Instead, they had pushed me to become something bigger, stronger, and infinitely more dangerous. I had built a new empire, not through rage or pettiness, but through vision, patience, and relentless belief in my own worth. In the end, my greatest revenge wasn't Summit Edge's downfall. It was my own unstoppable rise. It was the laughter of my team echoing in a room filled with success. It was the steady beating of my own heart, stronger than it had ever been. The river moved forward as it always did, carving new paths through stone and earth alike. But I, like the rocks my father spoke of, had stayed steady, patient, unbreakable. I smiled to myself, lifting my glass to the stars. "Here's to starting again," I whispered into the night, and this time doing it on my own terms. The current rushed past, swift and sure. But I was no longer afraid of the water. I was part of the river now, and noon, no company, no arrogant executive, no betrayal would ever stand in my way again.